Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Grande Bouffe.
The Big Feast.
With myself, Cole Smithey, and my co-host, Mike Lacy. Here, we're going to do it again.
Your ho-coast?
I got my ho-coast, okay? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Grande Bouffe.
The Big Feast.
With myself, Cole Smithey, and my co-host, Mike Lacy. As always, we are here to copiously consume international politics and culture through the prism of a single film and a different craft beer each week. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, Cole. Thank you for bringing this documentary about 2017 America to my attention. This is terrifying.
Rude boy?
Yeah, but it was really lovely and bizarre and fascinating. I never heard of this at all.
Really? You ever knew about this movie? Well, I chose Sam Adams' Rebel Juiced IPA for a couple of reasons. Sam Adams, as much as people malign Samuel Adams as not really being a craft beer brewery, they really are OG in the craft beer world. And, you know, the fact that they have Rebel in the name, I thought was appropriate because of the Clash.
And Sam Adams.
And Sam Adams, yeah.
He was a rebel.
Yeah. 6.2%
All right.
ABV. It's got tropical twist of mango and citrusy hops. So cheers, Mike. Let's drink Samuel Adams Rebel Juiced IPA.
Cheers. It's definitely fruity up front and then kind of tangy and hoppy in the back there.
Yeah, I agree with that. Very clear, balanced, delicious.
What do you think of the line of Sam Adams? They really do have a lot of different kinds of brews, and I have to say my experience is I don't love a lot of them. It seems like they go for a lot of variety, but they're all real sort of they're hop heavy in a way that I've never come to appreciate. It's not quite the session IPA type of hop. It's sort of a kind of stern big batch tasting thing, but I like this one. This is one of the better that I've had.
Yeah, I like this one. It's very drinkable. It's not bitter at all, even though I like bitter. There's a little trace of bitter on the tongue after the first flavor hits your mouth, but I like it. I think it's a good beer.
It's kind of branded a little of a summer beer, and maybe I'm just being persuaded by the weather, but there's something more sort of fall-ish, or we're not quite at the turning of the leaves at all, but we're
really close.
This to me is a sort of autumnal. Autumnal.
Just don't say sort of anymore, please.
Yeah. Thanks for not writing me notes and holding it up. Why, does that bother you? You've never mentioned that.
Really? Huh. Strange. I thought I had.
Cole virtually sits me down before podcasts and to some effect tells me that I'm not to say sort of.
You know, here's the thing that kills me about it the most is that if you do it, it's going to make me do it. That's what really kills me the most about it. And that's what really irks me about NPR, because they constantly do it. And I've written to them multiple times and begged them. I think they should just charge everybody. You know, like James Brown band, if you ever played a wrong note, he'd charge you $60
Oh, really?
per wrong note. I think NPR, anytime a guest or a host says sort of or kind of, I think they should charge them $100.
Do you think that it's something like... I think it's different than vocal fry, which is a...
Oh, I hate that, and they do that a lot on NPR, too.
Well, you know... You're not the first, like...
To notice that?
You know, white man to, like, write in to complain about that. But I think sort of is a different thing.
No, it's mitigating. And here's the other thing they do. All the time. Have none of these people ever had public speaking? I had public speaking my freshman year at San Diego State. I knew better than to ever say in public speaking.
I listen to NPR all the time, and this doesn't jump out to me at all.
Really? I listen to it all the time, and I turn it off all the time because of these very things. I can't take people seriously when they have to mitigate their line of thinking, when they have to interrupt their line of thinking. If you have a statement, if you have a thought or an idea, express it. That's it.
Right. And I think people are trying to
hide.
convey the reality that they're not certain on these facts, which you shouldn't be overly, watch CNN for people who are very certain about what they think. But I can see how they're not saying, it's different than saying the accused, or it's speculated that we're sort of thinking that this is going to be the worst summer for hurricanes on record. That's annoying. Versus it is suspected or something, using grown-up language for this. Is this what's bothering you about it?
Yeah, when I went to San Diego State, I had an English professor, and he was driven crazy because everyone, and they still do, young people, say like. It's I'm like, and then you're like, but it's like, and you can hear somebody, you can walk by a conversation and never hear any idea expressed. All you hear is like. And my professor said, if you want to correct this problem, use as if. So the situation is as if. And as soon as you have to make that comparison, it brings up a whole different line of thinking that you're responsible, that you have to own up to. It's about responsible thinking.
You're creating a simile which sounds more empty if you say as if and you have to complete that thought.
Well, as if is what you're trying to do with like.
Well, the like also...
You're trying to make a comparison.
It's also creating an entirely different way of phraseology. I notice with certain people, I will send chats on the internet or text messages, and instead of saying, and then I said to them, I'll say, and I was like, and she was like, and I feel like that would be extremely annoying to you, but it's faster. We understand that.
Well, you wouldn't do that in text, though. Why would you need to do that in text at all? You don't have those things. You would just say, she said, I said.
I'm not sure why, but I do, and a lot of people do that. It's definitely a millennial and younger thing.
Yeah, it's not millennial because kids were doing it when I was in college, when I was in high school.
Right, I'm just trying to distinction between, like, oops. Between.
And these are grown adults, by the way,
Sure.
on NPR, Leonard Lopate.
Yeah, this is the trillionth time we'd probably had this argument. And
Well, it's not an argument. It's just a discussion. We want to get at the truth as quickly and succinctly as possible, which is something this movie oddly does and doesn't do.
This movie's like a political movie and like not, and like critical of white nationalism, but also like kind of doesn't give a shit. You know what I mean? Like something like that.
It's a bizarro movie, and I want to set it up a little bit because there's a lot of controversy, behind the scenes controversy with The Clash and the making of this film, because The Clash gave these two filmmakers a lot of access to their rehearsal process, their performances, a couple of festivals that they played, and then the band found out that the filmmakers were putting in this racist or race element where they were painting these black characters in a certain way. And they disowned the film. And Joe Strummer famously said that he had never seen the film, and none of the band had ever seen the film, and that they had never made a dime, that they never received any payment whatsoever for their participation in the film. So
because of that subplot about
Right.
the police
and the black youths who were stealing.
that feels problematic, because that actually seems like a progressive, like racially conscious subplot, is that it's showing the police at the behest of what the Iron Lady, what the fuck's her name? Thatcher cracking down illegitimately when that's weird. That's like we'll get to that later. That's a confusing thing.
It is strange, but the film feels very cobbled together, and you get that sense that they got this actor. His name is Ray Grange, I believe, is the protagonist, who is this right-wing kid. He wants to be. He has the aspirational quality that all young right-wingers have, where the reason that they want to be a white supremacist or a Nazi or a right-winger is because they want to be the ones driving around the expensive black cars and not the people walking on the street.
Well, he seems like he's a punk. Is like the first thing that a modern person looking at this is that this is a 1980 like classic leather-clad punk.
Yeah, it's before that. I think it's 78.
And my gut reaction is to assume that these people are basically anarchist leftists, and then it's a great timestamp from history, and then it's very useful today to see that there's strains of white nationalism in them, and the character isn't showing up with the National Front, which is the now fairly old and kind of undying white nationalist movement that was popping up then, and gave rise to Thatcher a bit. That's the extreme edge. That's sort of the equivalent of the alt-right with Trump. It's not really who got him elected, but it's people who are very vocal and sort of speaking this gross subliminal racist undertone of society. And so he's a punk. And my assessment, you told me this, he doesn't want to be out there with them. He doesn't also want to be out with the university protesters against them. He's somewhere in the middle, maybe leaning towards the right. He's definitely, like, he drops the N-word.
Well, I love the conversation that he has at the bar with Joe Strummer. I think it's maybe the best scene in the whole movie because
they talk about politics the way actual drunk-ass kids talk about politics.
Exactly. And it's the leader of the Clash. It's Joe Strummer. It's the guy. And he's listening to the kid. He's not just, turning him down out of hand. He's not being condescending to him.
And he's not playing the movie like this godly archetype that's dropped in. You could watch this movie, and if you didn't know that this is a real band, you'd be like, okay, so he's playing the lead singer in a band.
Right.
He's very handsome, real bad teeth, almost cancels out the handsome.
Uh-huh. Well, you're right about 1980. The film was released in 1980, but it was filmed in 78 and 79. So it was filmed just after the year after the Clash released their first album, and while they were writing songs and performing songs from their second album, give them enough rope. And there's a little bit of pre-London Calling. So this is the Clash when they were really polishing their chops. And what I love about the movie is that you really get a lot of intimate live performance scenes with the band.
This movie on Filmstruck is categorized in a couple ways, one of which is musical, which it's not a musical in the exact sense, but in terms of a performance film, like a Storefront Hitchcock, it definitely falls into that there are sequences which in a traditional film you wouldn't have a band playing that long, and you almost feel that they are trying to heavy-handedly convey something of plot elements or reveal things through the lyrics of the songs. And there's even a scene where the character acts like he's reacting to what they're playing on stage. And so let's take a step back and just talk about the medium of this film and how it's pseudo-documentary, pseudo-narrative. And unlike something I've seen much, though, I have a coworker who's British that I was talking to about this movie the other day, and she said that she's seen quite a number of British flicks that play with this documentary style.
Docudrama.
I guess I call it I mean, would you...
It's a docudrama, yeah.
I would put this in a very different category than what we just watched, American Splendor. That's what I would call docudrama. Maybe this would also fall under it, but the feel of it is entirely different, and the construction and intentionality feel like it's coming from a very different place.
Well, it's more pasted together. You can tell how the filmmakers got their actor, and they integrated him with the band. I think one of the best examples of the thorough integration of Ray Grange's character with the band is when Mick Jones is singing "Stay Free." in the studio alone, and he's recording the song. And Mick Jones is from Brixton, and this kid's from Brixton. And then the kid's drunk, and he comes out and he talks to Mick Jones. He's been standing quietly by watching the recording session, and then he comes by and he just pours his heart out to Mick Jones about how emotional the song is and how no one's going to get it if they're not from Brixton and this whole thing. And Mick Jones just sitting there listening to him. It has that innocence. It's got that great innocence of the way that this band and these songs were. They were the way they resonated with people
on a very
with audiences
on a very small scale. And I think that the way the movie is constructed,
but not on a small scale, because that's a great song, and that song's on London Calling, and I love that song.
Right, it's made on a small scale, which I think someone would say is what allows it to be very universal. Right, it's the bands that come from a little hole in the woods that is that an expression? Hole in the wall. Hole in the wall that want to make these grand stadium, universally appealing things that
these anthemic songs, because the Clash were nothing if not anthemic. All of their songs are so anthemic. So and it's problematic because one of the songs that they play is White Riot, and that is one of their misunderstood songs, and it's also ironic that the lead singer for Sham 69 sings. They're doing it's an anti-Nazi festival,
mm-hmm.
and the lead singer for Sham 69 sings the song with the band, and Sham 69 had to break up because they got adopted by the skinheads, and even though that wasn't the intent of their songwriting or their music at all, because they were adopted by this group of people that they didn't want anything to do with, they had to break up the band.
Right, skinheads. Yeah, skinheads are like a really problematic section of the punk scene that I tend to forget about. And it's just interesting how music brings such disparate groups together, and how if what you're drawing people on is emotionality, that is really disconnected often from politics and worldview in an interesting way. And punk seems so ripe for that. I mean, punk 1,000 times better than I do. Mm-hmm. What's with that this strange bedfellows that tends to happen? You have people that are just completely, you have socialists, you have anarchists. You don't tend to have just sort of straight-laced Republicans. Sorry.
Well, you have these people that are on the margins of society, and in these times, in the late 70s,
there's a deep recession. We don't think that much about it, but
deep economic recession, and they do. The filmmakers do put that in the story. This guy's collecting about 15 quid a week from the dole, which is not much money.
And we're really supposed to, through the lens of the film, it assumes we're going to look down on him, see him as living off the teat.
Mm-hmm.
It's really constructed in a way that there is an assumed criticism there. And then when it brings in this element of the black side of town, and throughout it there is a discussion of this sort of othering, that though they're outsiders, they're still very race conscious, maybe more so than the mainstream successful part of society, because it's as accurate then as now is when you feel repressed or oppressed as a minority, as the outsiders, the poor. You, instead of creating allies, you create enemies within yourself. So there's this very constant element of what the black community in England means.
Well, and there's a huge black element in the Clash because they drew on their inspiration from ska and reggae.
Yeah.
So they were embracing black culture. Joe Strummer was embracing these cultures in the music that they were playing, and yet you look out at the tour that they're doing, the Festival Against Racism, and there's hardly
Lily White.
Yeah, there's hardly a black face in the crowd. There's only a couple of scenes where you see black people in the crowd, and it's problematic, and yet that's the reality.
And it's documentary footage. It's not something they're going to lay at the feet
Right.
of the filmmakers for how
Yeah.
they cast it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to circle back around, though, to Medium and talk about why this docudrama is so different than American Splendor. Because, for one thing, this feels very neo-noirish, right? Like you're filming on the streets. No, I'm sorry, not neo-noir. It feels, what do they call, like, the bicycle thief?
Neorealist.
Neorealist.
Uh-huh.
You're using documentary footage to trick people to thinking that it's staged, right? Where you're not integrated. There's no interviews with this. This isn't a movie. We're going to see the Clash talking to the camera about what they think.
No.
No,
you're gonna see where they rehearse, and you're gonna see Mick Jones showing up late for the rehearsal, and and how the band members are gonna give him a little ounce of shit for being late. But then they all pick up their instruments, and then
they're doing it as characters.
No, but they're.
But I know it's real, but like the
Yeah.
experience of watching it is. And you look at the credits, and they're credited as lead guitarist, singer,
Right.
drummer, and it's actual footage. It's really what happened.
Yeah.
But for some reason, there's a level of detachment, and you watch it as a film.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I love this scene here. We're watching. They're rehearsing, and so the way that they're rehearsing, they have the amps facing them, and they're facing the drummer, and that's how they rehearsed. And there's no question about the fact that this is how they rehearsed, and I love that. The camera's pretty stationary, and so there's no interference from the filmmakers. They're just gonna film the rehearsal, and this is what the rehearsal looked like. So I love this because you're seeing, when you're watching the band rehearse, that's how they rehearsed. They're facing the drummer.
What is the backstory on how this film got made? Do you have much on that?
These two guys who had never made a movie before. I think they somehow had access to the Clash. They knew the Clash, and they chatted them up they convinced them that they should make a movie.
And a plot is created, and it's about a young man who
works in a sex toy shop.
He works at a bookstore.
That guy looks like
shop.
Elvis Costello, by the way, the first customer that he has. I wanted to point that
he
out.
does. He's like
He's like a nerdy, like Elvis Costello
I was
kind
really
of guy.
surprised that patron didn't become a character.
He wants the really hard.
Yeah, he's got a
dominatrix
briefcase. Stuff. This is like the bougie guy. This is the was Thatcher she's a conservative. That was the party. He's clearly a conservative voter, and he knows them in some way and winds up becoming their roadie and has a complicated relationship with them. That's the plot. That's the plot.
Nutshell. He plays drums with He plays pool with Joe Sturmer's cousin.
That little guy is
who's this little right-wing fuckhead.
Right.
Who wears the skinny suspenders and the high boots.
So this movie is nuanced in its political spectrum, definitely. There are all shades of people who have what we'd call fascist or white supremacist views, and then like also a spectrum of being a supporter of liberalism and socialism. It sort of gets into the nitty-gritty with less criticism than you would see anything now.
Yeah, it's not putting things into black and white, and
it's not pretending these people really understand what they're talking about either.
That's true too. And it also leaves a lot to the imagination of the audience about how the music of the Clash is filtering into this character, because they'll have the live shows and he'll be in the audience and the camera will pan on him and just get his reaction. And he's the roadie, so he's watching these performances over and over and over. So he's really being indoctrinated into this vague, perhaps, realm of political theory through their songs.
Yeah,
and it does start to change his mind a little bit. It doesn't make him a drastically different person. He's still a slob.
Yeah, one version of this film, if it was to be Hollywoodized, I kind of like this, where we take a more art house movie and go, like, well, let's try to understand it. So, what would Hollywood do with it to like really strip it down of all ambiguity and humanness? And I think
Well, he wouldn't be getting a blowjob in the bathroom.
he wouldn't be getting a blowjob,
That scene would be cut.
and then getting his welfare money to maybe pay her afterwards. That was anyway. There's a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah.
And to boil it down, you might say this movie is about a kid who's toying with being on the right and having these supremacist views, hanging out with a leftist band, and really realizing that that's where he wants to be at and enlightening him. That's both oversimplification and not really what winds up happening.
Yeah, and there's the great scene where Joe Strummer, another favorite scene of mine, is when Joe Strummer's playing a shitty out-of-tune upright piano at the end, and he's playing this boogie-woogie, really basic boogie-woogie, but doing it raw, great.
It's a let the good times roll.
And then he does let the good times roll, and he tells the kid, what are you going to do with yourself?
Yeah, so this is my thesis of what the movie is The Clash was a idealistically pretty complicated seeming band coming at a time when there was really confusing, although really fucking familiar ideology swirling around politically, and how to
Well, they were very anti-conservative. There was no two ways around, that message that they shared with the Sex Pistols.
They're anti-conservative. And then tell me about, it's all kind of tied up in what's with the song White Riot? Like, that's kind of, is it about interpreting it wrong? Is that them just kind of having fun and thinking what is a song that will get people excited and not thinking about the ethics of it? That to me is the key to understanding the film and the funny place that the Clash played in that scene, because White Riot kind of speaking to a white supremacist riot against minorities. Was it satire? Was it just this would be fun? Was it this is a real thought that they had? It kind of seems like it's coming from a place of we don't give a fuck. We just want to do it because it's bloody fun, and we don't give a bollocks what people think.
All right, well let's talk about it. It was the Clash. It was their first single off of their debut record. So it came out. The record was released. The U.S. version was released in 1979, and I'm just going to read you the Wikipedia description. Typical punk style, 3 chords. Lyrically, the song is about class, economics, and race, and thus proved controversial. Some people thought it was advocating a kind of race war. Rather, lyricist Joe Strummer was trying to appeal to white youths to find a worthy cause to riot, as he felt black people in the UK already had. It contains a positive message in the lines, "Are you taking over or are you taking orders? Are you going backwards or are you going forwards?" So
I can see how you'd interpret that as not positive, though.
Yeah, and I think Strummer recognized he never wrote anything in that realm again. So
it was their first. It was their
single. It was their first single, and so I think that.
I think this movie is about that song. I think this movie.
Well, and I have to say I don't agree with you, but I understand why you would say that, because I think the song is played 2 times too many. It's the most repeated song in the movie, and it hurts me when I was watching the movie. This is only the second time I've seen the movie. I saw it in the early '80s when it came out. When I was living in San Diego, I saw it at the Ken Cinema in San Diego when I was going to San Diego State, and I didn't. At that time, I was just in awe of being able to see the Clash in a movie. I wasn't giving a lot of thought to it, but now watching it, it was really like fingernails on a chalkboard. By the time they play the song the third time, I feel like I can see how that's a problematic song.
I'm gonna give the filmmakers a lot of credit though, and say that it is a self-aware critique and analysis of their relationship to that song, and their skinhead fan base, and punk in general having this very tenuous relationship with being both progressive and regressive, and that when you're talking about tearing down the bad system, you're also giving room for bad actors to rise up again. They talk about like, yeah, if we all just want communism, isn't there someone who's going to be in charge of giving things out, and then they're in charge again? So no matter what, there's always going to be people like oppressing you and driving around in black cars. That's the logic of the main character. And I think he's kind of a personification of this unsettling part of that scene and of what gave them this prominence. It was their first big hit in this song. And I think they're not playing the song 4 times because it's their best song, but because it's getting at the heart of what's the conflict here.
And I think Sturmer's intent was, as I outlined a second ago, he felt like that the white people weren't standing up and protesting with the vehemence that the black people were. So it wasn't about a white against black thing. It was a white and black thing. He was trying, he was using it in a way that could be misunderstood, sadly, but the call to arms of the song is for the white people to protest as much and as vehemently as the black people, because these injustices were and are everywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
and you're talking about social injustice. You're not talking. He wasn't saying.
Allow me.
He wasn't saying that the black people were the ones committing the social injustices.
Right.
Quite the opposite. He was saying they're the only ones who are standing up and fighting.
There's just this weird, and it's so relevant now. There's just this weird thing about when you try to unite white people around the fact that they're white, that it gets weird.
It does.
It gets
no question.
Fucking weird.
No, as soon
and
as
you can have the best intents, but you're like, hey, white guys. Like, most people will be like, huh? A lot of people will be ignore you, and then some fucking people will be like, you called?
Yeah, right. You're talking to me.
You don't want to talk to those guys.
That's that. You put your finger on it. It's the whole thing with white is just so problematic because the wrong kind of people are gonna heed that call.
Well, they showed a kind of a cartoon earlier. It's a photo of the band, and then Strummer has a thought bubble over him, or speech bubble, and it says, "I ain't standing in no bleeding identity parade."
Right.
Which is at odds with having a song unifying white people to riot, but maybe there's also a part of a privilege of the idea that you don't have to identify racially to get by, because at the end of the day things are bad, but it's better than being a black person in England at this time. And I think the movies, I want to get back to there eventually. It's weird that what they were upset about was this subplot, because I don't think that they were, I guess maybe you'd say like the only representation of black people is that they committed these crimes. We'll get to that.
I came to this knowledge from Wikipedia, so I'm going to share it verbatim. So the Clash reaction: the Clash became so disenchanted with the film that by its release they had Better Badges, a company that made little buttons, make badges stating, "I don't want Rude Boy Clash film." Joe Strummer told Melody Maker, a music magazine, in 1980, "We didn't like what they were doing with the black people because they were showing them dipping into pockets, and then they were shown being done for something, and that was their only role in the film."
Okay, yeah, the exclusive representation. I'd like the only thing I'll say is like that there was also a lawyer who was a black person, so it's not exclusively.
Yeah. Well, let me finish. All right. So he says, so who wants to propagate that? That's what the right wing use. All blacks are muggers, which is a load of rubbish. After that rough showing, I've never seen it since, nor have any of the Clash. Sturmer added that the band had no further contact with directors Dave Mengay and Jack Hazen after the film was shot, and never received any payments from them.
Interesting. What do you think? I think. Well, one thing is, as a film thrown together, it's extremely tacked on, this subplot where you have the police with their security camera spying, like watching for a black person committing a crime. It totally feels like it feels that it is a critique of Thatcher's advocating for beefing up the police system, and really what they mean is not cracking down on their corporate criminals or anything like that. It's cracking down on the poorest of the poor. I have to say that it's very tacked on. I could see boycotting this movie because it is a totally tangential plot line, making an interesting but auxiliary point to it. But it did not strike me as racist from the point of view of a person 30 years out, 40 years out.
Sure, but Joe Strummer is going to be hypersensitive to that because it's a movie about his band, and he has a very particular.
And he did see a rough cut, right? And they've never seen. Maybe it was a lot more extreme in an earlier cut.
Who knows?
That's an interesting reaction from watching this version of it.
Yeah, I would love it if Joe Strummer were still alive today. I have a great photo of Joe Strummer in my office that a friend of mine was kind enough to give me, that was taken the day before Joe Strummer passed away.
Oh, wow.
And my friend who just got married recently gave me that photo, and he saw the Clash when they were in New York City. They did 3 nights in a row at Bond in Times Square. I can't remember the name of the venue, Bonds, or I think it's called Bonds, about 45th or 46th in Broadway. And he also has the live recordings from that, and it's terrific. But he was one of the few lucky people who saw that show.
Wow.
And this is right on the heels of this movie. This movie was made before they came to America with London Calling, and they're just such an amazing band. And so I love that this movie exists, if nothing else, because you really do get to see what an amazing punk band is all about. And punk is pretty much dead. People think that Green Day is punk, and obviously those guys stole their whole shtick from the Clash. But that's
a 20-year-old reference at this point.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So yeah.
You know what I like is the relationship between the kid who's hanging on with them in the band, because he doesn't belong there. He doesn't have the roadie chops. He's not as cool as them. He's not as smart as them.
And he's not a hard worker.
But there's always that guy, and I've been that guy in certain things. I've been the person who's a place that I really don't deserve to be at, and I'm too stupid and untalented to even understand like how much I don't deserve to be there, and I'm not going to get invited next time.
I do just want to side note a little bit about, this is the anti-Nazi group, and they're taking money. They have these plastic buckets, and they're asking for money to help pay for the show, and that every dollar is going in their pockets.
Right, they're smoking it that night.
And I like that little touch is in there, because we know about the scandal with the Red Cross, how none of the money that anyone ever gives the Red Cross ever shows up in the hands of the people who need it.
Well, you can't really earmark it. All kind of like,
and all charities are like that. The thing that I know about charities is that they're all a scam. They just take your money and it disappears. Especially if it's cash.
It's like,
and a lot of people, anytime there's a humanitarian crisis, all of these charities all of a sudden pop up out of nowhere, and then you never hear from them again.
Well, here's the thing. Just side note on this, old sidebar with it. People only give money for acute crises. People don't give money for long-term crises. They don't give money to curing AIDS in Africa. They give it because there's a mudslide.
Right.
And so and they give tons of it, but if all that money is earmarked just for that mudslide, then none of it goes to AIDS. And so they're in a real bind there, where
who's in a bind?
The Red Cross say.
No, the Red Cross is a sham, just like the United Way. They've been look it up. They've been busted deep, wide, and continuously.
Well, I know this big thing was about people earmark the money to go to a specific thing. It doesn't go to that.
I don't know what you're talking about earmarking.
Well, you say it's like donate to the tornado relief, donate to the hurricane relief, and then it winds up going other places. It goes to overhead because they need overhead. But is there too much to it? I don't know. Probably, maybe not. But
the point is, none of the people who are suffering see a dime of that money. You would be better off going down, if you really want to give some money to somebody who's hurting in Florida, you'd be better off getting in a plane, going down to Florida, and just handing some people money.
I'm not going to like co-sign that the Red Cross does no good and rips everyone off. But have you heard of these?
Look it up. You will agree with that once you research it.
Have you heard this thing where there's this charity that is experimenting with just giving cash to people in need?
Oh, I heard about that one. Yeah, in Africa. They give everybody the same amount of money every month.
Yeah, and they're basically
But that's not a charity. That's more of a social experiment.
Yeah,
that's legit.
They're experimenting because they looked into it to see what the outcomes are of, say, giving people a cow, like the Heifer Project.
Right.
And it turns out no one knows. No one, so clearly it's doing that, like giving them a thing is better than cash, right?
Yeah, they've been doing it for about 10 years. Yeah, they give them the same amount of cash.
So much a charity like that is the equivalent of food stamps. Like, well, we don't trust just giving poor people money because they'll just spend it on drugs or something.
But what you're talking about, they give them cash.
They just give them cash.
I love it. Yeah,
and
I heard
and it's an experiment.
About it,
it's this crazy thing where maybe other people who need money understand how to use it better than you do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a real gross control that we put in lots of welfare and charity things where we tell people how to use it. It's like, well, that's very infantilizing.
Well, I think we hit our stopping point. Rude Boy is streaming on FILMSTRUCK. I was very pleased to discover it. We had to do some shuffling around with the films that we're covering in the podcast for delay reasons involving streaming availability or DVD availability, as the case might be.
I picked a movie that's real hard to watch. It's a real art house underground thing. Can I say what it is?
Yeah.
It's The Real Cancun.
Yeah, we talked about it on the last podcast that we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And here's the story that we're going to do. We're going to do Spring Breakers this Friday.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have a special session next week so that we can do the real follow it up with the real Cancun.
Well,
and this one will have to follow.
This is some real metagaming. Why don't we do this one this week and do Real Cancun next week and
Spring Breakers the following week,
or Spring Breakers next week, and then record. We'll figure it out, guys.
We'll figure it all out.
You'll see it. Just check your feeds.
So many devils in the details. I want to thank you all so much for listening. I know we have a lot of friends in the UK who listen to the podcast.
And hopefully you jump on this, spread it around.
Yeah, I'd be interested, if you guys want to message us, you can always send messages through colesmithy.com. And of course, if you go to any of the pages other than the home page, you'll see where you can link to my Patreon page, and you can